All right, with that, we'll get started here. Good morning. This is Tim Stewart. I am president at Visual Decisions, and we're here today to talk about improving visual controls with Industry 4.0. At Visual Decisions, we've been in the business of utilizing information from the shop floor to improve continuous improvement since about 2002. Implementing Industry 4.0 or digital transformation technologies can help drive great improvements in operations. Our customers have seen dramatic improvements such as 30% increases in OEE, 50% scrap reductions, and much more. But just like wearing a Fitbit won't automatically make you thin, implementing technology for Industry 4.0 won't automatically make the business better. The culture of the organization and the business processes have to be adapted to take advantage of the new capabilities to drive real improvements. This is why we have a unique approach of combining the smart factory and the lean factory to create a real-time lean environment. We work with our customers to adapt processes to take advantage of the new capabilities and help our customers establish a true data-driven manufacturing culture. As a quick procedural note, normally I would say that if you have questions during the presentation, enter them into the Q&A and I'll get to them at the end of the webinar. But since we have a small audience here on election day, if you have any questions, I've allowed the audience to talk. So just take yourself off mute and feel free to ask questions interactively as we go along. So the goal for today is this: how can we improve visual controls so that we can see the real-time status of every process from anywhere? To achieve that goal will require change to how things have been done in traditional manufacturing or in lean manufacturing environments. By the end of the webinar, we should understand why this is beneficial and how to achieve that goal. To get started, we'll look at a few types of visual controls to narrow down our focus for the discussion. Then we'll look at the purpose of having visual controls and what they're meant to achieve. So at a basic level, visual controls are meant to inform people of the status of an operation or provide directions or instructions on expected behaviors. These goals can be achieved with simple controls such as an and-on light or static visuals such as stop signs or shadow boards. In this discussion, we won't be focusing on these types of controls as they are generally adequate as they are. We're not going to change the function of a stop sign with Industry 4.0. One note I will add though is items like an and-on light showing the status of a machine right there at the machine can be enhanced through a simple app sending alerts to responsible people when the machine stops, giving the status of that machine in different applications and so forth. So that notification can also be directed to different people such as engineering, maintenance, supervisors, quality, etc., based on the primary fault code coming from the machine controller after the stop is detected. So while the basic and-on light function wouldn't change, what you're doing with that information certainly could. The next type of visual control that we'll focus on for the rest of the presentation are process-oriented visual controls that are meant to help run the business. As stated in David Mann's book, Creating a Lean Culture, the purpose for visual controls in lean management is to focus on the process and make it easy to compare expected versus actual performance. Another way to put it is to provide the nervous system for lean management. There are endless examples of these types of controls, but I have a few listed here. SQDCIM boards, safety, quality, delivery, cost, inventory, manpower, and environmental. Production pitch tracking, job by job tracking, daily accountability boards. That's the example over on the right side there. Labor and rotation boards, attendance boards. Each of these serves a different purpose. Some of them are meant to track whether the teams are winning or losing on a given day or how they're performing versus plan. Some of them are meant for basic tracking and others are used for planning purposes. But no matter what the purpose, you see a lot of the same type of whiteboards and paper, stuck to cork boards and things like that. And just one quick note is that manufacturing has really embraced technology over the past, well, always. However, operational excellence has often been resistant to automation and continue to use whiteboards and printed Excel spreadsheets. Looking at the innovations that have come to manufacturing over the past 10 or 20 years with robots, augmented reality, lasers, and other things that seemed futuristic just 5 to 10 years ago. It's really amazing to see all the advanced technology embedded into manufacturing processes across industries. But then when I walk shop floors, I still see whiteboards being used to manually track shop floor information. Then someone has to either type the information into Excel, or it's lost as soon as that whiteboard is erased, or I'll see SQDCIM boards where people are printing information from Excel and posting it to the boards on a daily or weekly basis. Either way, you end up with a shared folder full of Excel spreadsheets with information from previous shifts. The whole process is very wasteful. There's excess motion, rework, defects, and more. So at this point, these boards are due for some automation. And here we see an example of a gentleman that looks not really thrilled maintaining this information on an SQDCIM board. And a very common way of looking at manufacturing performance is with KPIs, or key performance indicators. And these are often organized into those categories of SQDCIM. And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of companies, these are tacked up and are tracked in a manual fashion and displayed on these boards with people either coloring in the sheets themselves or printing them off from Excel and posting them up. And on the one hand, they're great because they're color coded. You can immediately see whether the status is green or red for any metric. And that's great. It's very visual. It's very easy to see where the problems are. But again, this can be done in a much more automated fashion with a lot less waste in the process. And looking at this gentleman again, I would argue that what we see is an example of the 8th waste, or underutilization of human potential. I'm sure that he could be doing something more valuable with his time than putting printed sheets into a magnetic holder every single day. So that waste is one of the problems with manual controls. For people to walk to the boards and enter information or read information requires wasted movement. Writing the information on a whiteboard and then later capturing the information in Excel requires rework. And as mentioned, it's a waste of time when this can be done automatically. In this example, the gentleman is actually an engineering manager, and he could be solving problems in the plant, but instead he's printing out forms, carrying them over to the board, swapping out an old sheet with a new sheet inside of that plastic holder. Another issue that is extremely common is errors. Missing data can be a huge issue, as can transcription errors when somebody's typing that information into Excel. As an example here, I had a customer that was using a pasteboard to track production and downtime. Then they captured that downtime from the pasteboard into an Access database at the end of every shift. As a pilot for Industry 4.0, we connected an IIoT system to track some of the uptime and downtime on the equipment to automatically capture downtime events. And when we did an analysis of their manual tracking versus the system and what it was seeing in terms of the actual downtime, the manual process was capturing less than 10% of the downtime events. And that was driven by a lot of short stops, minor stops, jams, et cetera, on the equipment. And sure, they were short, but they added up over time. And the current approach was capturing less than 20% of the total downtime as well. Everyone meant well when they were doing the data collection, but when the machine only stopped for 60 or 90 seconds for a jam, nobody bothered to write that kind of event down. It's just the way that the line worked. So when they went to improve the performance through Kaizen events, they were using information that was just woefully incomplete. They didn't even know what the big problems were, let alone the root causes of performance. And that highlights another problem: keeping up with a fast-paced environment. When it comes to capturing minor stops, high production counts, or any other rapidly changing information, manual methods just can't keep up. That's how you end up with less than 10% of events being captured. Then there are additional limitations. Information captured on a whiteboard is only viewable from right in front of that whiteboard. Sharing information with other groups such as engineering or maintenance, purchasing, quality, or others is impossible unless they're standing right there too. In order to save or persist the data, it has to be entered into a system anyway. I've worked with customers that had major product recalls that had big gaps in their available information about what happened on the floor when those parts were produced, because the information went on a whiteboard and at the end of the shift, it got erased. Finally, there's only so much detail that you can put on a whiteboard. There's only so much room for those markers to actually write stuff in. So a system can capture much more context of what was happening at a machine or a process that just isn't otherwise possible with the traditional methods. So with all of that, why stick with manual controls? And from that book of Creating Lean Culture by David Mann, I have a lean manufacturing background, and a lot of my feelings on combining the lean factory and the smart factory actually derived from the principles in that book that I read way back when. And so I very much believe in a lot of the different philosophies there, and I'm a strong believer in reducing waste and everything else that comes with lean manufacturing. What I don't agree with are some of the different points that he makes here in terms of why you should stick with manual visual controls instead of going to a system. And a lot of these were true back in the very early 2000s and so forth, because the systems that we had at the time and the displays that we had at the time weren't nearly as robust or flexible as what we have today. And so I'll be going through all of these different points on the slides to come, but just a couple of things right now in terms of some of the focus. And really, when he talks about sticking with the manual controls, the biggest single thing for him is the ownership of that information. That if you take away that whiteboard and you take away the people entering that information themselves, that it no longer has their fingerprints on that data, and that they won't own that data any longer. And that is a very real concern. What I have found, though, is that if you change the focus so that instead of entering that information by writing it on a whiteboard every day, you create the standard work and the standard processes around the use of that data every day, where you take those people and instead of having them use their time to write that information on a whiteboard, you have them on a daily basis use that information to better understand and improve the process. Then you actually drive better ownership of not just the information, but the process as well. So let's go through these points kind of one at a time. And as we go, we'll have a focus on how to go digital with these things and how not to get stuck with monuments that are difficult to change, because that was the other key point that he made during that process, is that when you create these systems, in order to change that reporting, you need somebody from IT, and that can be a 6-month process to get them to change a report coming off of the ERP system and so forth. And so how do we go digital, maintain the flexibility that you have with whiteboards and so forth, and maintain that interactivity? So his first point was timely information. Is the information timely? And from a traditional view, as you're doing things manually on the shop floor, the information is current as of the last pitch. every hour or every half shift or whatever, somebody's supposed to go up to that pasteboard and write down what it was that they had produced versus what was their target. And for IT provided, his point was that it's current as of the last data entry and the last time the report was run. And again, this is very ERP centric in terms of what he's saying there. With Industry 4.0, that is just absolutely no longer the case. The information will be collected directly from the machine in real time and can be displayed anywhere in the world nearly instantly. So the information is actually far, far more timely with like the Internet of Things and Industry 4.0 than it is by somebody periodically going over to the whiteboard and writing that information down. Is the information accessible? And the traditional view is that if you have a whiteboard, people can see that data from 10 feet or more. And that if it's IT provided, it's right there, but it's only for the individual right in front of the screen. And his idea of the information being displayed is very much with this operator standing right in front of that display. But we have the possibilities today for these big screen TVs to display that information. We have augmented reality glasses that you can walk around the plant and look at something, and it can overlay a display of what is the current performance of that machine. So right now, the information that's being captured can be displayed anywhere in the world nearly instantly, and it can be on phones, tablets, computers, TVs on the shop floor, augmented reality glasses, pretty much anything that you want. And so from an accessibility point of view, there's just absolutely no comparison of that static whiteboard in one place on the shop floor versus information everywhere. Is the information precise? And from that traditional point of view, again, he says that it's not always precise. Notes are sometimes vague. Reporting periods are occasionally missed. And for IT provided, yes, absolutely, regardless of the accuracy. And ignoring his snark a little bit there, with Industry 4.0, the information is again bottled at the source directly from the machines. The information is going to be accurate and more precise than the manual data collection. Again, the example from that company that I mentioned earlier was that it's capturing more than 10 times as many downtime events, and you are getting far, far more accurate and more precise information than you're getting with the manual data collection. In addition, you're getting so much more context. What were the fault codes on the machine when it went down? What parts were I running? Who was operating the equipment at the time? Everything else that's going on. You can capture ambient temperatures and capture that with the information and so forth. And so not only is the more precise and more accurate, it's also more comprehensive. And so all of those things are going to help you identify root causes of problems and then address them as well. Is the information verifiably accurate? And his point of view was that if you have a whiteboard out on the shop floor, it's usually close to the machine, and you can kind of walk back and forth pretty quickly to verify that information. Whereas data that was going into an ERP system, first of all, it wasn't necessarily timely. It was kind of a black box for how that information gets captured and then processed by the ERP system, and then what comes out from the traditional reporting and so forth. And so from his point of view, it was very difficult to verifiably or verify that information on an accurate basis. Whereas for what we're doing with Industry 4.0, and we're capturing that information at the machines, first of all, you can verify that through periodic testing to make sure that the sensors and the controller are capturing information accurately. But again, since the data can be displayed both at the machine and centralized locations and anywhere else you want it, the information is available anywhere. You don't have to walk back and forth to the whiteboard. It's actually there at the machine with you on a tablet, and you can watch it as it's coming off the machine, compare that against the tablet, and make sure that things are counting the way that they should be. Does it prompt questions? And this was another interesting point that he went into in a fair amount of depth. That as you're putting information up on that whiteboard, you can ask a lot of questions and you can answer them right where the control is posted. Whereas if you're getting a report from an ERP system, really you can only answer the things that are right there in the report. But that's no longer true with Industry 4.0 and with IIoT systems and so forth. They're basically endlessly flexible, interactive, and can contain far more detail and context than the manual reports. As I was talking a few minutes ago, you can have information about who was running the process, how it was working yesterday versus today. You can have all kinds of different questions that you can ask and answer from that contextual point of view that are simply impossible with just a whiteboard in front of you. Easy to change and customize. And this is one, again, that he looked at as being a really significant advantage for whiteboards. If you want a different measurement on that whiteboard, or if you want to change from hourly data gathering to every half hour, you just change the whiteboard, and or just put a new whiteboard out there and put the new hard text on there and so forth. With IT provided, it was going to IT and asking for a change to that report coming off of the ERP system, and again, it could be 6 months before they would deliver that. In a lot of cases with IoT systems right now, it's not a lot more complex to change some of those reports than it is for somebody to go into Excel and change how the reporting is being captured in Excel. As long as the information is being captured and is there and available, a lot of times, being able to go in there and maintain those UIs is pretty straightforward. And for larger changes, we recommend using an agile methodology that very closely follows Lean itself to initially develop a minimal viable product, and then use cycles of improvement, continuous improvement, to roll out improvements and so forth, and utilizing those same concepts to rapidly change whatever information is being displayed. And then for a lot of things, it's very easy to create a configurable system. So as an example here, we replaced a traditional SQDCIM board with this display. And what we did here was they were tracking, I think this was 26 metrics across the 6 categories. And instead of putting this into Excel, we replaced the Excel spreadsheets that they were using with live data being captured from the system and then aggregated up. And so the COO would have a weekly call where he looked at the information at this top level and would talk to his plant managers for that given time period. For every red mark, they would look at this and they would go through and say, what was the target, what was the actual, what was the explanation for the miss, and then what is the corrective action that's being put in place. All of this information was captured in different systems, but we were able to basically use a hub to collect that information together and create a display for that. Now, this was the COO's view across those different plants, but each plant manager had the exact same interface with the different lines for the operation. And they would be able to see that same view, but by line. And then you could continue drilling down on that to get to individual areas of responsibility and so forth. And so by having that same view, same process, we were very much able to implement standard work and really drive commonality across the entire company. The other key aspect of when we created this was that this was all data-based. So there were many additional metrics beyond these 26 that were outside of the initial focus that were collected into that database. And then they just had a configuration screen where they could pick which of the different KPIs they wanted to have on the reports. And so if they wanted to change the report, nobody had to recode the system. They just went into the admin UI and picked which were the different KPIs they wanted to focus on for the coming time periods. Intimidation factor. The traditional view is that the whiteboards are very low in terms of intimidation. It's as difficult as coloring with crayons, and IT provided can be quite intimidating to those not literate in the system. And in my mind, I'm picturing that he's thinking that IT systems look like this picture over on the right side, and are just overwhelming for people. Certainly, I don't think in 2020, just having information displayed on a screen is at all intimidating anymore. Everybody looks at their smartphone every single day, all day long. People just aren't intimidated by screens anymore. Even the old schoolist operators that you have out there use phones and so forth and are used to seeing information on displays. And so just having that on a display itself doesn't mean anything anymore. And how the information gets displayed can be as simple or as complex as you want it to be. And so depending on where you're showing that information, who you're showing it to, that can all be tailored to the needs of your workforce. In terms of intimidation, a lot of these things like being able to do manual statistical process control data capture and so forth required a fair amount of math for people. That's no longer required if you do that using systems and you automate that process. And that's a lot less intimidating for a lot of the operators than having to do all of that manually or with calculators punching buttons in and so forth. The other thing that I'll say is that for recruiting new workers and bringing people through the process today, showing them whiteboards and we're going to be capturing information on a whiteboard is just not interesting to them. It immediately turns them off. And so if you want to recruit and retain a younger workforce and have them be invested in the process, having more interesting capabilities, even going towards augmented reality and so forth, we have found significantly impacts ability to attract and retain talent. I talked about this one a little bit earlier in terms of ownership or alienation. And what he talks about is floor operators create the information that stays in their areas, often in their own handwriting, and that information is taken away from the floor, transformed into computer generated reports that no longer have fingerprints when it's IT provided. And it is a valid concern. I mean, you have to wonder whether those displays are just something that fade into the background over time, and if they're not interactively putting information on there, will they even bother to look at them anymore? And again, that's a valid concern, but that's all reliant on the standard work that you put in place. And if you create standard work for from the operators on up through the leadership that utilizes that information and actually takes that time that people were using to do busy work in the past, and now you have them use that information to actually look at what are the biggest problems that I'm having today, what can be done about that. Are these the same problems that we're having every single day? Are we having this week after week? What can we actually do about that? Those are the things that you want people to be doing. So you can not only still get that interactivity with people utilizing that information, but you can create a bias towards action that creates far more ownership of the process itself and more value from simply being the one to write the information on the whiteboard. Information simultaneously available in many places. This was one that he was willing to grant before, and it's even more true now. As I mentioned earlier, the information can be displayed anywhere in the world at any time on any device. Computational accuracy. With humans, no computation should be considered routine. Definitely the strength of an IT system. And the note that I have here is that not only does it make it easier and more accurate, but it also lessens that intimidation factor of having people interact with the systems and the data and so forth. Overhead required. And this is the one point that I'll still give him, is that yes, whiteboards are a lot cheaper than implementing an IoT system, no question. But the value that you can get from all of those other capabilities that I talked about before, and having all of that additional information, all of that additional data that you can use to solve problems, how you can create that bias towards using that information to actually drive improvement, instead of people just wasting time putting information on a board and thinking that their job is done because they wrote the number on the board. That bias towards action can create a huge, huge return on investment for these systems if they're done in the right way. And so while an Industry 4.0 approach is undoubtedly more expensive, the value that you can create more than overcomes that cost. I've mentioned augmented reality a couple of times, but from a perspective of visual controls, I definitely want to talk about this a little bit more. With the glasses and so forth that are clear, so you can still see where you're going in the plant, still see the process and so forth, but give you that additional contextual information for basically whatever you're looking at. The possibilities as we move forward and have easily adapted and enhanced augmented reality systems are really endless. And being able to involve people that much more deeply into the process and so forth, and as I said, the ability to both recruit and retain a new part of your workforce is really high value in terms of where you can go with that over time. And that's it for the presentation today. If you have questions, please reach out to me, tim@visualdecisions.com. My phone number is there. I will definitely be following up with each of you by email, but don't hesitate to reach out to me instead. I would love to talk to you to find out how you're actually addressing these issues today, what kind of visual controls you have on the shop floor. I'd actually love to go visit once that's actually possible again in this world, and see what you're doing, and walk through some what the possibilities are and so forth. At this point, if you take yourself off mute, you can either ask questions or you can put them into the Q&A, or we can call it a webinar. All right, well, with that, thank you for your attendance today. I will actually take this time and go out and vote. Thank you very much for attending. Bye-bye.